Hi from Yokohama, Japan to all of you in the Pocahontas and Virginia Indians course. I'd like to thank Rick Tatnall for inviting me to participate. I'm just a student in the course, but he asked me to give a shout out from Japan. So, hi from Yokohama. So I'm an English teacher in Yokohama, but I became interested in Jamestown and the Pocahontas story when my elderly parents moved from New England to Richmond to be closer to my sisters. I started reading a lot about Pocahontas, Jamestown, and the Powhatan Indians in 2016. The Rasmussen and Tilton books were kind of my entryway into the Pocahontas story and the myths that surround her. But over the last few years, I've read, I think, just about every book that's been published on those topics. I don't have a memory that's adequate to remember all that stuff, so I thought I should make a website where I could organize my thoughts and write down the information that I wanted to remember and be able to retrieve later. My website, Pocahontas Lives, is a non-monetized site, and it's basically like a huge wall of sticky notes organized by topic. If it's useful to any of you, that's great. I hope you'll comment, and if you point out any errors that you might find. If you'd like to take issues with some things, that would be great. I'm not concerned with getting traffic, but I am interested in providing accurate information. I apologize for any gaps and unfinished pages. It's still a work in progress. As much as I've read about Pocahontas, I can't say that I really understand her. What I think I've learned is that a lot of people seem to understand her, and it appears that she is like a blank canvas that they can fill with their own vision of what they think she was like. Personally, I've learned to live with the ambiguity of Pocahontas, but I'm no less fascinated with her short story. For reasons that I can't really explain, I've taken up the task of trying to separate out the myths and misinformation about Pocahontas in favor of trying to highlight the few facts we can state with some kind of certainty. I also do this with John Smith and other aspects of the Jamestown story. I suppose my stick to the facts approach may put me at odds with people who are more imaginative and intuitive about the story. Let me give you an example of the kind of minutiae you can find on my site. So John Rolfe, the husband of Pocahontas, died in 1622, which is coincidentally the same year as the Powhatan Uprising. And in some older sources, such as this 1957 one, we read that Rolfe was likely killed in the uprising. On the other hand, in this 2019 book by Karen Ordahl Kupperman, we read that John Rolfe died in the epidemic that swept the colony at that time. And she just states that as an unqualified fact. Well, as far as I can tell, there's no evidence for either of these claims. No one knows how John Rolfe died. But, apparently that kind of uncertainty is not interesting, so authors make their best guesses. In this case, I think they both guessed based on the timing. I actually lean towards Kupperman's explanation, but I think she felt the need to be as definitive and confident as possible. Otherwise, readers are just going to go with whoever has the most emphatic explanation. On my website, Pocahontas Lives, there are a few pages that are a little more organized that I'd like to recommend. One of them is called What Should We Make of Smith's Rescues by So Many Women? Briefly, Smith has written that not only Pocahontas, but other women have helped him in time of need. If you're a reader, you've inevitably come across this explanation for why John Smith is unreliable. Helen Roundtree and Camilla Townsend, who I respect, and I count Camilla Townsend as a friend of mine, they both use this argument to cast doubt on John Smith. And the story has been repeated so many times, it's basically just accepted as fact. But I think few people have actually looked at what John Smith wrote. I think it's not quite as clear as people have described. I wouldn't say Smith is completely off the hook, but I think people should read and judge for themselves. And notice too that Frances Stewart, the double duchess, was a woman who no doubt did help Smith, but no one wants to mention her because she doesn't support the narrative. Anyway, check out that page. It's one of the better ones on my site. There's another page on my site that deals with the claim that John Smith never actually met Pocahontas. Amazingly, this idea is promoted by a few people, including a history professor at VCU in Richmond. Maybe I'm naive, but the fact that John Smith was the first person to ever mention Pocahontas in writing in 1608 seems to contradict that. But apparently that's what a Virginia historian would have us and his students believe. Something I've written a lot about is this book by Dr. Linwood Costello and Angela Daniel, so please check that out on my site. I also gave a presentation about it in London at the Pocahontas and After conference in 2017. So here's the thing, I'm not opposed to many of their ideas about Pocahontas, and I find it totally reasonable that current Powhatan Indians would have a dim view of Pocahontas's capture and captivity. And I think we should all question how she may have been treated. What I object to is that this book has been promoted as evidence passed down from 400 years ago, and that it's Mattaponi sacred history. Well, from what I can tell, it is not that. It is the personal thoughts of Linwood Costello and the not Powhatan Angela Daniel. I was told by George Costello at the Mattaponi Museum that they just made that up off the top of their heads. I've spoken with 5 Powhatan Indians, all very knowledgeable about Powhatan history, plus a Native American expert and consultant on Powhatan anthropology. And while they all knew Linwood Costello and spoke respectfully of him, none of them said, "Oh yeah, that book is totally reliable." They all said some variation of, "Be skeptical, do the research." So that's what I've tried to do. And you can read about that on my site. Incidentally, Helen Roundtree said, and I quote, "Linwood didn't get any of his stuff from his ancestors." 2 other things of interest on my site are a list of every mention of Pocahontas by John Smith, and also 2 side-by-side versions of the letter by John Rolfe to Sir Thomas Dale, where he expresses his desire to marry Pocahontas. The one version that we know best is actually a redacted version, but there's another version with some missing details. Check out my website if you have time. Hopefully it will improve after I participate in this course. I'd like to thank Rick Tatnall for helping me understand better the perspective of the Virginia Indians. So I'm sure the course will give me a new burst of energy for my website. So contact me if you'd like to. Matane.